Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Exponential Europe Podcast. You might ask yourself, what is Exponential Europe? Well, thanks for asking. Exponential Europe is a community, but we're not just a community. We are a community with a cause. What cause, you might ask? Well, thanks for asking. The cause is to see reproduction and multiplication become the norm in the language and the behavior of the church in Europe. And how that all happened, how Exponential Europe came about, no one better to tell us than my guest today, Maria Boschker. How strange to be sitting here with you and talking in English. We usually converse in German. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
So here we are in Orlando currently. We're at the Exponential Global Conference. So we're going to see the birthplace of Exponential in some sense. But we're here to talk about Exponential Europe. But before we do that, let's hear about you, Maria. What are the most important facts that we need to understand about you?
Well, I'm German, Austrian by birth.
Are you really Austrian?
I'm Austrian by birth, yes.
Because you lived so close to the Austrian border?
No, my parents, the whole family is Austrian.
No way, I did not know this.
See?
What is happening right now? What?
Yes.
So do you have relatives in Austria?
Yes, a lot of relatives in Austria.
Oh, wow, they're very different.
Yes, they are.
We love you Austrians.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, I did not know that. Okay. Austrian by birth, but
Austrian
you're
by
German.
birth. I'm German, yes. It was before the EU time, so it made sense to become a German citizen.
Yes.
I'm married, 2 kids.
How old are your kids?
11 and 13, boy and girl.
Wow. Exciting age.
Very nice kids. My husband is Dutch.
There you go.
So I studied in the Netherlands and Norway.
Whoa. Okay, first off, your husband's not just Dutch. Your husband is a laser scientist.
Yes, that's true.
Which is very cool. And so, and then you decided, I can't live in Bavaria, in Germany.
Yes.
I can't do this. What was it about Germany or Bavaria that was so difficult for you to imagine staying there?
Well, so as I said, I'm Austrian by birth, so we moved to Bavaria.
How old were you when you moved?
Well, I was small. Good question, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, okay, so really.
I really grew up there, but I never spoke the dialect because my parents would have a different one.
Yeah.
So I speak High German in Bavaria.
Yeah.
So I was already an outsider. And I never really felt home there.
Yeah.
And I felt the people, their life, just, don't be mean, it's just, their perspective is until the hills, until the mountains, and that's it. I felt it's just small.
That's the whole world that they would see.
Yes,
and you always.
I always wanted to have a big perspective.
Where did that come from? Your kind of vision or perspective for the wide horizon.
I don't know. I do know my mom always loved to travel and just see the world. She didn't she grew up in a very tiny village in Tyrolia, and she hated it as well. She just wanted to get out and see the world. So there's maybe something there.
In German, we call that Fernweh.
Yes.
I don't know how to translate that. That's like it's like not homesickness. It's the opposite. It's when you're home, but you're sick for the wide world.
Leaving, yes.
For leaving, for being out in the world and seeing the kind of the larger horizon.
Yes.
And then you decided to do a crash course in Dutch and then study in Holland, in the Netherlands.
Yeah, because I was a top sporter before, and I should have done it maybe, but had the probability to go to Munich to really focus on a sport, but I just couldn't imagine standing. Track and field.
Wow. Okay, so you could have been an Olympic track and field, but you decided to study psychology. Is that right?
Yes, psychology.
Not even like anything to do with sports. Well, indirectly.
No.
Yes, yeah. And then you went to study psychology in the Netherlands, and you met your lovely husband.
Yes.
And then you decided the Netherlands is not far away enough, and Dutch is not difficult enough, so you're going to do a crash course in Norwegian.
Yes.
And then you went to study in Norway, and you studied neuroscience?
Neuroscience, yes.
What was your master thesis about?
It was about tarsal gustatory system of the moth Heliosis virescens.
So very close to anything multiplication and reproduction. Like what happened from that trajectory of like psychology, neuroscience, and then suddenly you ended up back in Germany in the Berlin area in church planting? What was that journey? What happened there? It feels like you went off track.
Yeah, but God happened to say it like that. So I grew up Christian in a Christian family. So it was not that So I've been a Christian from my early childhood. And yes, I was very keen. I knew I would become a scientist. I would be a professor and teach at university. And that was set for me. There was no way around it. So I would say I was really good had a really good master thesis, had a good Master of Science degree, best of my class. And then I didn't get a job for a year. I was unemployed and couldn't find anything.
What?
I had 7 offers of PhDs around in Europe, but my husband was not done yet with his PhD, and he was really against me moving ahead and then
long distance marriage.
Long distance marriage was not an option for him, so I had to find something in the area of Trondheim, and there was really nothing. And even there, I had 3 PhD positions that were on the verge. I was talking with someone, and then all the doors shut very strangely.
Wow.
It was really strange. At some point, I just said, okay, God, I can't do this anymore. I will now pray, and you tell me which job to apply, because I don't want to have one more decline of a job. And then I prayed, and after 3 days of prayer, I had a very clear impression that God told me, I haven't prepared you for this, but I prepared you for the church and ministry. And I was like, wow, you're kidding.
Worst 3 days of prayer. It's not what you wanted to hear.
No, it wasn't what I wanted to hear.
That's crazy. And then why move back to Berlin, or why Berlin?
Also God. Because then we started, hey, what's the thing we should do, or I should do in ministry? And that then church planting became the topic. So we were really going in that direction, doing some courses, classes, reading books, and so on. This was
still in Norway?
Still in Norway.
Interesting.
And then we were really just seeing, hey, where do you want to have us? We had some possibilities in Norway, obviously. But we got our first daughter and realized, well, it's a bit sad to meet your grandparents once a year. Mm-hmm. So we said, hey, let's just go a bit closer. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go to the Netherlands, because I think the Dutch people are much nicer than the German ones. No offense.
Wow.
But God was again very clear and shut all the doors for the Netherlands. Germany was wide open. And it was actually one meeting at the summer. The Scandinavian Vineyard at that point had an annual summer camp. And Martin Böhmann, the former leader of the Vineyard in Dach, was there as a speaker. So I got introduced to him, and we just had a very small talk. He couldn't remember it afterwards. And he was just, I don't know what it exactly was, but it was something about Germany and me coming back. I said, hey, I will never come back. I hate this country. Forget it. And
strong feelings about Germany.
Strong feelings. And he was looking in my eyes. He got really serious and said, but Germany needs people like you. And I was like,
wow. And that was like a call.
And it was like a call, yes. It was the first time that I really had to rethink my whole attitude towards Germany.
Wow.
And I started praying and thinking about it and realized there was an unhealthy attitude, distancing and emotion towards Germany, and I had really to go process to break down the walls there. And then we really felt, yes, God is calling us to Germany. So since we were mountain climbers for hobbies, we thought, well, let's do southern Germany. But then again, it was really Berlin came wide open. I was like, no, to Berlin. I really couldn't imagine. I'm a small village person, so I couldn't imagine living in such a big city. But God was so clear in his calling. So.
And then what did you guys end up doing there? Did you start church planting? Or?
We joined a couple who started a church plant in Berlin and joined the team. Yes.
And are you still part of that church plant now?
No, it's up and running, and at some point we just felt our time is over. I'm not an administrator; I'm more an entrepreneur. So I just realized how I started getting bored just by keeping things running and improving them. I just really like starting things. So we are now just part of another church, and I then joined Exponential, where I can start new things all the time.
Yes, true. So did the kind of the mindset or the idea of multiplication, was that already and always there, or in what way did that enter your world?
I think it came very much in Norway. So pastor by them was Per Christian Lunde, who is also now the leader of the vineyard in Norway. Already at that time was very much on church planting. So he would talk about church planting every week. So this whole idea of planting churches, to plant churches, was ingrained in that time.
Oh, that's cool. And then now you are the COO of Exponential Europe. You've just done your Doctor of Ministry. Now you're working on also getting your PhD to catch up to your husband. But you're not going to do it in physics. You're going to do it in theology.
Yes.
So you have a passion for research. You have a passion for studying in the academics, but also how that ties in closely to reality.
Yes.
What does the COO of Exponential Europe do? What does that even mean? That you are the COO. So when people see you, they know what questions not to ask you.
Well, or what to ask. So it's starting to get better, but there was a time probably that it's still probably now almost everything that happens in Exponential Europe goes by me in some way.
Yeah, it crosses your desk somehow.
Yes, it somehow crosses me before it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So normally, if you have any question, I at least know where to direct you. And so if anyone has any question, it's easiest to get to me, and then I will point them to the right person.
So how would you explain to people the story of Exponential Europe? How do you kind of lay it out as to Exponential Europe is 5 years old now? Six?
It's 6 years
6
old
years
now.
old, yeah.
Yes. Well, I haven't been there from the total beginning.
Yeah.
I came in after the first year. So I know from telling what happened before. But I would say the general story is Exponential Europe wanted to start big, but then I would almost say luckily COVID hit. So they had to change all the plans, go decentralized. They came up with the idea of roundtables, did the first round of roundtables in 2020, I think. I then joined in February 21.
So I've been with Exponential longer than you.
Probably.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was registered for the big conference 2020, which never had happened. But
yeah.
So and then from then on, we just realized, well, obviously still with all the restrictions, we couldn't do a big conference. So we kept on doing the smaller things and realized it was actually a blessing for us.
Why do you say that?
I think it's mostly because as I said before, so the idea was really go big and maybe be a wow moment for people. And I honestly don't think if it could have happened in a European context, because we have so many nations, so many languages and cultures. You probably would have had 50% of Americans there. And then those people that speak English well enough that they think it's worthwhile traveling there. But now we went decentralized. We got, from the first thing we did, the first roundtable already was in all the different languages. So we really went grassroots from the beginning. And I think that is, in the long run, more difficult, but more sustainable. So I think an Exponential just got a different perception from the people through going grassroots instead of one big conference.
It is a lot slower.
It is a lot slower, yes.
I think it's hard for people to understand, but it is a lot slower this way. But like you said, you build something that will have more longevity. Because like you were talking about, the reality of bringing Exponential into Europe is you have to translate everything.
Yes.
Into, I don't know, how many languages? 12?
At the moment we do 11 to 12 languages.
Which is a lot. There's a lot of work.
Yes.
Every time you want to do something, you have to think about the translation of the workbooks.
Yes.
The translation while the conference is happening. Then you have not only translation, but you have videos in the different countries, in the different languages, and that all has to come. There's a lot of stuff happening in the background. So thank you, Maria, for being the puppet master of all that. I know you don't translate all those. Oh, you speak enough languages, you could translate half of them, but
But I wouldn't enjoy translating it.
Yeah, but I think that's a good reality for people to understand with Exponential Europe. What is your... Why is Europe so different to, like, say, Exponential US, where we are now? What makes it so different in your perception?
Yeah, I would say it's the mentality, the culture, plus the languages. Because the languages can be overcome, obviously. But then the mentality and the culture is so different that... And yes, in the US, I would also say there are different cultures and mentalities, different in the different states and so on. But I would dare to say the difference in mentality, culture in the US, what you see, is no way what we have in difference in culture in Europe. It's just much more different.
It's a lot of diversity.
It's a lot of diversity. And we just never assume that our opinion is the opinion of the country next to us. So it's just a very different way.
Which makes it difficult when you're trying to change the norm and behavior and language of the church. Because even changing the language of the church is like, well, what language do we use? And what is the existing language? You have to find that out first. How have you seen Exponential work differently across Europe? I mean, you have... Obviously, your insights into Norway and the Netherlands and Germany, but then also now you work with people on your staff from France and from Bulgaria, from Romania and Hungary. So you have a quite broad perspective and insight into what's working where and how do we have to adjust. Like, give some examples of where things had to be adjusted just because the local culture there works differently.
One thing is, I would say the mentality. So I would say, for example, for German and French people, you need to give them a lot of freedom, get them in a process early on so they feel they have a voice in it. Go to Central Eastern Europe and you more or less can say what they should do and they're happy with it. So it's
more top-down.
It's more top-down. We're still not doing it top-down, but it's just we have to be much more careful with definitely France and Germany to really get them on board very early on and really go every step. So they really get the ownership. Whereas in Central Eastern Europe, you can do a little more, giving them a framework and then help them to fill it. So that's...
Are there different obstacles to multiplication?
Yes, I would say so. So there are, in some of the countries, this whole idea of church multiplication has not settled. So they are still just struggling to survive or just maybe think about one church plant, if at all. I would say, for example, Romania, and I hope I get it right here, but there's much less unity in the church than, for example, in Germany. Germany and France have come, and also in general, I would say Spain, UK. So a lot of the Western European churches, they are quite far along the road when it comes to unity. Because we realized several years ago, 20 years ago, hey, we have to work together, and otherwise it's not working. So for us, it's not.
But I don't care if you're... There's so few of us.
Exactly.
Much less than maybe in Romania too. So maybe.
Yes.
That's part of it.
And I really don't care if you're Baptist or Pentecostal or Lutheran.
Right.
If we have the same heart, we work together.
Yeah.
And this denominational differences, they're much more pronounced still. For example, Romania, also Moldova, and some of the Eastern.
How does that
countries.
make the kind of bringing in the idea of multiplication then difficult in places where there's more denominational divide?
Well, the one thing is because they're much more in their heads. It's much more important to keep their denomination, their brand. So it's just not as important for them, I would say. For a lot of them, they don't think so much about multiplying and reproduction because it's
perspective.
Yes,
not there.
They much more have the denomination perspective, and then you have people, of course, and that's those we're working with that definitely have the kingdom perspective, and they just really have a hard time convincing others.
Yeah.
So it's much harder for them. In Germany, when you come there and you talk about church planting, everyone say, yes,
which has changed, right? Like
it has changed.
Like 10, 20 years ago, that wasn't quite the case. So that's definitely shifted.
Yes.
But now I think the difficulty in places like Germany and France is everyone's so busy. There's collaboration and unity, but there's community, I would say, but not always the community with the cause of like, okay, let's actually work together and let's. So there's a church planting idea there's not always a church multiplication idea, which is the difference. Yeah. So, and I think this is the difficulty of Exponential Europe. You have different obstacles in different places. So even when we have roundtables around the same topic, it's how do you make it in a way that they can touch on the obstacles that they need to touch on in Romania that perhaps in Germany is a different obstacle that they need to touch on. So how do you see that happening? Like if you look 10 years down the line, how do you see Exponential Europe being structured in a way or maybe having found a way that deals best with the complexity of the continent?
Well, I would say, for example, in 10 years, we have kind of a Exponential Europe umbrella where we put out the theme and the principles, which are very, principle-based. So which doesn't tell you how and what, but just, that's the how. It's really the what, but not the how. So there will be this umbrella, I would say, and then you have really strong national teams that are really not autonomous, but really their own environment. So Germany, France, or Francophone, in that case we are working in a language group, Romania, they will have their own leadership, their leadership teams. They will have their own strategy, how to change and reach their country. And in 10 years' time, I would say we have very strong nations for Exponential within Europe that have found their strategy, their way how to reach their country. And we can then, when we add for another country, then use those as examples how to do it in another country.
But we kind of give freedom in the implementation.
Yes.
To those who know how to best do it because they know their own context.
Exactly.
So you give kind of ownership in that sense.
Yes.
To the national team.
Exactly.
Even though the principles are the same across the board.
The principles are the same, but the implementation, how to do it,
practice
very different.
I think that's very smart. But again, it takes a lot of time.
Takes a lot of time, yes.
Because you need to find those national teams and leaders and empower them and bring them into the principles. So it's a long and slow process.
It's a long and slow process, yes.
So what keeps you, in those long and slow processes when you're sitting there and you're having to translate all these things? What is something that continues to excite you about Exponential Europe where you feel like, it gives you the energy to keep going?
Well, one thing definitely with those teams and the nations is I think it's really interesting to work with people. Hence probably my psychology background as well. It's just fascinating. It's never the same. It's always different. But then also I think it's so interesting to get a grip and an idea of all the different cultures in Europe. I just have such a broader perspective since I'm working with Exponential in Europe. Because even before I was traveling, but you travel to a country. But now you get to know the people, you get to know the culture, you actually really get an idea, a feeling for it. So I think that's one of the things that keeps me in there. And the other is definitely with Exponential, what also I mentioned shortly before, I'm an entrepreneur person. So I'm not good in the administrative part. I'm not too detailed. I can be detailed oriented, but I think that's painful. So I really like starting those new things. And Exponential it's more or less, maybe one sense it's stable, and at the same time it's new all the time, coming up with new projects, new teams.
Figuring out new ways.
New ways, exactly. And that's what I think it's just really interesting. Other people would hate it. I love it.
Well, but you think you're right. There's some stability to it, right? Because the general principles are the same. And you can kind of focus in on those. And there's certain rhythms that we have with the Europe-wide conference and then the national conferences and the roundtables. But at the same time, there's so much for people, listening who are like, ways to get involved in Exponential. There's a lot of ways you can get involved because these national teams trying to figure out how do we do multiplication in our context. I don't know why we're using Romania and Germany the whole time, but going back to there are other countries also.
Other countries, yes.
God bless other countries, Czech Republic. But I'm thinking of the 97% Orthodox background in Romania is very different to, let's say, Sweden.
Yes.
Or then the more Catholic South with Italy. Multiplication within those contexts is very, very different.
Very different, yes.
And this brings me to my next point, both in terms of the complexity of the continent, liking to start new things, and then there's a lack of just us really understanding and knowing what's going on.
Yes.
So you have a heart for research.
Yes.
Give us a little glimpse into that. What is it? Why is that fascinating to you, or what kinds of things would you say need to happen in terms of research in Europe?
Why is it fascinating? I don't know. Probably that's more a personality thing. I always like to find out things, even when I was younger. It's just something someone likes or not likes. And in a way, I feel that it's coming back when I wanted to be really a scientist. I almost, at the moment, last year, I really had this, at some point, this impression, God bringing me full circle. Because I almost had the impression, okay, I had to stop it, but that's it. And I really felt like, no, God is seeing me. He's bringing my passion back, but using it differently than I expected in the beginning.
That's cool.
And I just think, well, in the US, I was always jealous for example, Barna Group. They have so good data and statistics on the church in the US, and they actually can work in a strategic way with it. But we don't have this in Europe. There are obviously some statistics also across Europe or in Germany. But
they're
when
more,
I
they're more
look
like
at them,
guesses.
well, there are some guesses, but they're mostly they're screwed in a way. If you take just easy membership statistics, what do you get? Just take since a lot of the European countries have had state churches.
Yeah.
You have a high membership.
But it doesn't tell you anything.
But it doesn't tell you anything, exactly, because what does it tell to me if 50%, I think it's at the moment it's 51 or 52% of the German citizens are part of either the Lutheran or the Catholic Church, and then you have another 2 or 3% in the free churches. Yeah. That's a minor thing. But that would mean that 55% in Germany are called Christians. But even if I would ask them if they consider themselves Christians, you wouldn't get 55% saying that. Yeah. So it's just not a realistic number.
Yeah.
Also, yes, the membership numbers, of course, they are correct because those people are part of the Lutheran or Catholic Church or any free domination.
Right.
But that's why I say I feel they are screwed, because it doesn't really tell us anything about the spiritual pulse in Germany.
Yeah.
So we need to find a way to get numbers that actually tell us about the spiritual state of a country and then of Europe, other than by just taking those membership numbers, which are not working for us. So, and this is something that I know several organizations, and they would love those numbers, but it's just, and I'm sure some has tried, and there might be some numbers, but they're probably not out there in the public.
And then the difficulty of, we're trying to get numbers not for one country, but for...
Yes, for all the countries. How
many countries are there?
28.
28?
I'm not sure.
I was going to say 27, but maybe I forgot about Vatican or something. Yeah, 28. Yeah, sure. Let's go with 28. So, that makes it even more
exactly.
difficult.
because we want to have comparable data.
Why do you think we should need, like, there might be people out there who don't care about research, and you're like, why do we need this? What's the benefit for exponential, for multiplication, to have the data?
Yeah. So I just think you need data statistics to have a good strategy. Because strategy, when you do lead a church, develop a church, plant a church, whatever, you will have a strategy how to do it. Everyone tries to do its best, and I just really believe that we can have a better strategy if we are informed about what's the real state. So we need to know what's the reality at the moment to then create a strategy how to get to the next step or next phase. So if we don't have those numbers, we're just guessing.
Yeah, it's a lot of anecdotal strategies.
Yes.
And now also it limits our perspective in, someone might be in Transylvania. We're going back to Romania. Sorry, Romania. Some of you might, someone will be in Transylvania and feel like, oh, there's a couple of churches here. Things are really, but Transylvania is not all of Romania.
Yes.
And so if you only have your own perspective on where you are, you might see a couple of churches and have, you feel like there's some Christians around, but the rest of Romania looks very different. And so again, the percentage of Christians within Romania is very skewed by just kind of Transylvania. At least that's my understanding. All the Romanian listeners is gonna hate this episode, but two Germans talking about what Romania is like. Yeah, and then I think the other piece too, if we don't have numbers, then we don't know if our strategy is working.
Exactly.
Like, do we actually see an improvement? If Exponential Europe wants to see the reproduction and multiplication shift, well, how do we know it has happened?
Exactly, because if you don't know where we are and
you don't know whether we've gotten any further.
Exactly. So yeah. So that's really what I think it's needed. We need some good numbers and then repeat those surveys every 5 years to actually see.
And I am totally on board with this. Like, as I'm planning already, also Europe-wide survey. I think we need to do, and sometimes I think we can overcomplicate the process.
Yes.
Yes, of course, everything can be a PhD project, and God bless all the PhD people out there. But sometimes we can also start quite grassroots, which is what I've loved with the network and the community we have with Exponential Europe across Europe. We have a lot of people that can just find 50, 100 people within their context, and if we bring those numbers together, we have a real opportunity to bring forth some numbers and document some things that can really help. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated to start with. So I'm really, really excited. Yes. You got my vote for more research because I agree. We were just, we just met Daniel Yang, who wrote a book with Warren Bird, and there's this third author, and I forget her name. She's a journalist. Anyway, it's called Future Ready Church, and they have a bunch of statistics in each of the chapters that they work with. And we are gathering with some leaders in our city in Frankfurt, and we're reading through the book. And every time we have to find our own research, own statistics and numbers. But it's very difficult sometimes to find because they have these, Pew Research Group or Barner and all these Lifeway and all these larger groups that we don't have. So I think that's a real added value that Exponential can give to seeing more multiplication data. Yes. As well. But you've done some of this already, which was your Doctor of Ministry.
Yes.
What was your research project there? And just as an example of how research and data and surveying has helped bring things to light that we can then perhaps even implement in other places.
Yeah. So my dissertation project was on a very specific area. I focused on Eastern Germany, the former Eastern Germany only. And to start with, I obviously had to get an actual count of all the church plants. I chose 2016 as the starting point because there have been some two researches done before, up to 2015. So I said, let's start 2016 to get the new ones. And I already was quite shocked, or maybe not shocked, but at least it was a sad thing that since 2016 up to 2023, there were 30 6 church plants in the east of Germany. And I didn't look at Berlin because it's just different. But that's not a lot. That's 8 years and 38 church plants.
In a big region.
In a big region. Really, it's a big region. And it's really sad that it's... But then Eastern Germany, yes, it is a hard place to plant a church. But it gives you a perspective.
Yeah.
And this was really a full count of all church plants. So I got in touch with all the denominations and everything I could find on the internet. I would ask church plants, do you know another one? So the only church plants that didn't get in, at least just a few of them, to be honest, are the house churches, because it's really hard to track them down.
Yeah.
So there's some house church movements in there in addition. So I didn't look at them. So it was mostly churches, denominations, but still just 38. And that gives you a bit of reality check for Eastern Germany.
That in itself already is one number, and you're like, oh, okay, that tells us a lot.
Yeah. And then I looked just of how they're doing it, if they have some successful practices they were using or how they were focusing on different things. So did you
have like an interview process or?
Yes, I had an interview and a survey with everyone. So it was a combination, quantitative and qualitative. Yes. So get some numbers and then get the meat around the numbers, so to say. And it was very much focusing on, hey, when you think about the whole aspect of missional intention, how do you live this in your church plant? Then I was looking at the discipleship. How do you make sure people are developing, how they mature and grow? And then the other one is, how do you form the actual community aspect of a church? So it was getting numbers and stories and examples around
what
those
were some
aspects.
Exciting stories or out of that maybe didn't even make it into the paper, but it was just personally inspiring?
Well, I think, Jen, I was really amazed by the creativity of a lot of them. Because some of them, you really have to think they went somewhere where there was really nothing before. So you really have to start getting the trust of the people, yes. So one day they actually bought a church because it was on sale. And the people
a church building? A
church building.
Like an old Lutheran church building?
Yes.
Wow.
But the people around they were used to the building, but there was no church in it. And they thought it was fine, there was no church. But now there came a church building, the church inside the building again. And they weren't really welcomed, to say it like that. But so they really had to find a way how they can, what do they need to do, what the people actually will value they're doing. So today they're in a state where the people are coming and they just for not even, so they started a lot of non-Christian offers, just you could come, have a coffee, have a knitting group,
just to rebuild that trust and relationship.
Just to rebuild that trust, yes. And they do alpha courses and the people are coming now and they really have a growing church now. But it was just a lot of time just building trust with the people. And it's just those things that you get somewhere and you need several years to build trust before you actually can start working on planting the church or really putting a name on it. And so you need to have a lot of patience and a deep sense of calling. Otherwise, don't make it.
You don't stick around.
No,
for that
you don't stick around. Yeah. Well, and others they work a lot with it's a concept that's more working in the Lutheran Church in Germany. It's a way it's a very open church form. It's almost like doing it on the street where you can invite everyone.
Like messy church?
It's come from messy church, but
fresh expressions.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
But so they did theater things on the street, telling Jesus stories from the New Testament, on the street in a theater way, but as like a acting,
play,
like a play, a role play, but then adapted it to our times today. So how could this story look today? So they were doing those things just to get.
And that was just impromptu on the street, like. Just,
no, it was not impromptu. It was in a park area, for example. But they were
and
just.
there was like an invitation to it. It wasn't just they didn't.
People
just,
could just come and look, and
And then that sparked conversation.
Yes, that sparked conversations, and because people, they don't know the stories, they don't know the concepts, so they really need to had to think through those stories. What did they meant in the time of Jesus, and how could this look like today? And so there are a lot of very creative things that are happening there.
What would you say? Like, obviously, people should just go and read your paper, but the gist of like what is some of the key findings that have come out of that for you, or for Exponential?
Yeah. So I think that there are two major key findings, I would say. The one thing is the importance of relationships. I think it's, in general, always important with church planting, but I think in a secularized, agnostic environment, it's even more important because people won't come to a church if they don't know you. They don't just drop in a church service. They don't come to an Alpha course just by having a flyer in the postal box. So you need to build relationships and trusting relationships. And then they, at some point, might be open to come. It's not even as secure.
Not a guarantee yet.
No. So it's really relationships. And what all of them, that was really interesting because all of them confirmed it. And not because I asked, because they came up with it themselves. So they said you need relationships for the missional aspect. They won't listen to your stories if they don't have you don't have their trust. Then they won't mature and go into any type of discipleship if they don't have a relationship with you. And they won't come to any meeting and to any community building aspect if they don't have a relationship. And then in that aspect, it goes further because they will also build new relationships in this community, in the different community meetings. So it will be an add-on. And one or two, and that was also interesting to say, well, even discipleship, a lot of the discipleship is happening in their communal meetings because they say, a lot of the people, they live a life like, hey, I don't like this, so I don't do anything with you. So they really just, they have their own bubble of friends and family. And if they don't like you, they just ignore you and won't take time, which is probably the normal way to live.
Right. You just hang out with the people you like.
Exactly, which is normal.
But then you come into the church and then you don't pick your siblings.
Exactly. You just have to deal with them. So they say there's so much discipleship
just
happening
in that process.
Just in that process, exactly. And then they had people saying, oh, can we just kick him out? I don't like him. So, no, we are all in here.
That's one solution, yeah.
Yeah, it was. So there's a lot of things happening there. So relationships is really very important. And I said before, I think that's always important.
Yeah.
But in this agnostic atheistic environment, it's even more important, I would say.
I mean, again, back to statistics, one statistic from a non-Christian survey that people in Germany don't trust the church. Only 5% of the population trust the church. So for us to have a voice or an impact or influence with our testimony, for people to stand and listen when you stand on the street and preach, you have to rebuild that trust.
Yes.
And then that means building relationships, and that means spending a lot of time. And then you can start thinking about, well, if our models of church don't allow for us to have that time, then maybe we have to rethink some of the models as well.
Yes.
Interesting. What was the second piece?
The second piece, that was more on the actual data, the quantitative part. I love statistics. I love all the calculations. Yes.
How surprising.
It exists. It was really interesting. And of course, you can now discuss the shortcomings of the numbers and everything. But what was really interesting, because I did ask the church planters how much time they invested in missional living, in discipling the team and the church, and in using time for this community building. And what was interesting in the statistics, that the only significant difference they could really see why is some churches having more baptisms, more conversions, and growing faster compared to others, is that those that did focus more on discipleship would grow better. That was really interesting. And in a way, you could maybe also say, hey, the mission aspect was plus minus around the same amount of time. They were using the same with the community, and some really neglected discipleship. But those that did not neglect discipleship, they were actually really doing a lot better than the others.
Which doesn't mean don't spend time on the others.
No, you need to spend time on the others. So
but it means
keep that.
if you don't have an emphasis on even people that have come to faith,
Yes.
going back to multiplication, right?
Yes.
If someone, as Kenneth Boe would say, evangelism always has to lead to discipleship, but discipleship always has to lead to evangelism. Those two things are not separate. But if you don't lead people into a maturing process that then enables them to also live missionally,
Yes.
if you just put them into the group and say, well, it's a win, that's not enough. Yeah.
Because a lot of them just say, our discipleship is happening in these small groups,
Right.
for example, or in this Sunday service.
Right.
But that's not enough.
No, especially with the relational piece then again.
Exactly.
It's a lot of one-on-one and a lot of time
It's a
spent.
lot of, actually, that's the main thing those that were doing it were doing a lot of one-on-one.
And then that showed its fruit
Exactly.
in a multiplying missional life as well.
Exactly.
You're adding more people more workers to the harvest.
Exactly, because in the end, it's the church planting team. They were missional, they were discipling. They were active, but you need everyone in the chain to do the same. And you only do this by also really discipling them and getting them again to disciple someone and getting them again and so on.
Yeah.
So discipleship. So that's what I said before. So and what you also said. So they need to keep doing the missional. They need to keep doing the community, but don't neglect the discipleship part.
It's actually a very important part.
Yes.
Yeah. See how good research is?
See?
Thanks, Maria, for taking the time. It's been so cool hanging out, and we will continue to hang out, obviously, here in Orlando and within Exponential Europe. Thank you for everything that you do and all the work that you do.
Thank you for having me.